Hello, Stamford parents, residents, and anyone else tuning in. In this video, I'm going to summarize and get you up to date in the situation here in Stamford, Connecticut surrounding the open school board position. My name is Stephanie Edmonds. I am a co-founder of the organization Stamford Parents United, which is just about a year old now. And so on the situation surrounding the open seat on the school board, it was vacated by Ben Lee and resigned for personal reasons, too many responsibilities with his job and his family. And although he was a Democrat and he did usually toe the party line, I hate the fact that school board politics are so partisan, but it is what it is. He proved that he would go against the so-called party line and actually implement things that the families of Stamford want. For example, last year, there was a debacle with the schedule. The superintendent and the Democratic members of the school board were pushing a 4-block schedule, while the families and teachers of Stamford wanted to go with an 8-block schedule, a system that had proven to work at AITE. And thankfully, Ben Lee stepped up and implemented the will of the people here in Stamford and moved us forward with the 8-block schedule. But that's not what we're here to talk about today, just giving you some background and context on who Ben Lee was, why the seat is open, and now let's talk about who might potentially fill that seat. There's 2 candidates, and according to the board rules, they have to be Democrats since Ben Lee was a Democrat. The 2 women vying for the position are both former members of the school board. The one who was most recently on the school board is Janine Burke. She retired this past year and did not run for re-election in 2022. And the other is Jackie Pioli, who had previously been on the school board. However, she did not get the nomination, in 2021 to run, ran as an independent and did not win. So she was not on the school board this past session, but would like an opportunity to serve again. And so on Tuesday, January 17th, the Stamford Board of Representatives met, specifically the Appointments Committee, to interview these 2 ladies and then go on to vote on who would pass on to the next round of the appointment process. And overwhelmingly, the Appointments Committee voted for Jackie Pioli 8-1. And this is interesting because I think I forgot to mention before that Janine Burke is actually the endorsed candidate by the DCC. That's that Democratic committee. And most of the Stamford Board of Representatives, including on the Appointments Committee, are also Democrats. So this vote did go against party lines. But as we're going to get to in the clips in a minute, you're going to see that it's still very much entrenched in these party politics, unfortunately. So that's the TLDR. And if that's all you have time for, I hope that gets you informed. But I am going to play some clips I have lined up from that Stamford Board of Representatives meeting the other day where they were interviewing the 2 ladies. And I think it's really important both for getting to know who the candidates are themselves, but also for understanding the political landscape here in Stamford and how entrenched it is in these party politics and how much that does play a role in perhaps the public perception you may have of these candidates, which I would argue doesn't exactly line up with the truth. And that means our work isn't done either. Once you're fully up to date on the situation and have time to form your opinion, now you need to reach out to the Board of Reps and specifically the member who represents your district and let your voice be heard. Send them an email and then follow it up with a phone call. Have a conversation with them. I promise you, they listen. So stick around to the end of this video for the specific action to take, including an email template to get you started. Before we get much further though, I want to let you know about my bias. I'm a co-founder of Stamford Parents United. We endorsed Jackie Pioli for this open seat. I have been registered in the past as both a Republican and most recently as a Democrat, though most of my time and what I am currently registered as is unaffiliated, which while these things are inherently political and there's no escaping that, there's nothing wrong with being political, that's life. However, it's unfortunate, in my opinion, that these things get so bogged down in party politics. But again, such is the situation, so let's get into this.
The next item is A31062, and that is to fill a vacancy on the Board of Education, and we are interviewing Jackie Pioli.
So this is a long interview. We're talking 3 hours long and then followed by another nearly 2 hours of interviewing of Janine. So we're not going to be able to watch the whole thing here, and sometimes the questioners and the speakers ramble on, though their point has been well made. So I'm going to do my best by choosing clips that really get to the heart of their arguments, though they're going to be substantially shorter than if you watch the whole 5-hour plus ordeal. The first representative to ask questions is Bobby Pavia, and the questions, they start out hard, and they really don't let up the whole time. And some people, like Bobby Pavia, while they're hard, they seem friendly and really give Jackie the opportunity to tell her side of the story, which, as we're going to see, is a major theme of the night, is getting misportrayed in the paper and possibly for political reasons.
What your greatest accomplishments were on your last time on the board?
Bringing attention to the gap and trying to really advocate to help the students. I think that was a success, and not in every manner, but I definitely think that now the district and the administration is looking at data-driven decisions that would help close the achievement gap.
As we are going to see, Jackie Pioli's understanding of the education system and what it takes to actually close the achievement gap are exactly what this district needs and is exactly what is lacking on this school board. Let me remind you that our equity audit found that only 20% of classes have written curriculum. We need somebody like Jackie to keep the pressure on, because that is the number one issue facing the district. Now, she is also the author of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Policy, and while I don't agree with the DEI policy on its face, when she talks about the implementation of it, I believe, as an educator myself with a master's degree in education, she is spot on. So let's continue on with this line of questioning.
You have a good communicative relationship with your fellow board members on the last board?
So I feel like I need to take a breath to answer these questions, so bear with me one sec.
That's okay. Take your time.
So you can see Jackie is clearly nervous, trying to slow the situation down a little bit, take a breath. And that is because, if you are not aware, one of the public perceptions of Jackie is that she is combative. So this is a very important question for her to get ahead of that narrative and establish her side of the story.
Yeah, I think looking at communication, there is a snapshot of a Tuesday meeting that generally you guys or even the public watching this watches. So there is a huge other aspect of the board that not many people are aware of. Did I collaborate with my fellow board members? Absolutely. Did we have disagreements and not see eye to eye? Yes. But I had made every effort during the 3 years that I was there to communicate with the board members and what I was thinking, how could we collaborate.
What's something that you've learned from your last experience on the board that you could take on if you were to get this position?
An in-depth knowledge of procedures of budget season and how things work. It's also, I would say, because of my job, and I am well versed in what goes on in our school. And I think that that's what we really need on the board currently right now.
And this is really why I support Jackie Pioli. We know she works with the administration. She wrote the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Policy, which is arguably Superintendent Lucero's favorite thing. However, she is also willing to stand up and to challenge them and to ask the hard questions. And for some, that makes her combative. I would argue those who like to carry out the Democratic Party line. But let's hear about Jackie's answer to this question, because she makes some very important points about the space between what is the public perception based on those Tuesday night meetings that are on video and all the other work that is being done behind the scenes.
Thank you. And you just mentioned the administration. You've been critical of the current administration. How would that, or would it affect your ability to work with them?
Okay, I want to make it really clear. And when we summarize that I have been very critical of the administration, we're looking at it from a personal aspect. And if we go back and we look at the board meetings and the votes in which this perception has been made that it's critical to an employee or employees of the administration, it was not that. I was speaking in regards to the data and how that data that was presented wasn't being used. So again, being critical of one person is not what I did. What I was critical was proposing programs that weren't effectively helping students succeed in every area.
So the specific situation that Jackie is referring to happened between her and Nick Tarzia back at the beginning of her term as a school board member. So she hasn't been on the school board in a couple years now. So we're talking, over 3 years ago. Nick Tarzia just finished his time on the school board. He was not reelected. This was a one-time incident where apparently Nick Tarzia said something rude and inappropriate about Jackie's family. She reacted in not the most emotionally cool manner. It was a one-time incident, didn't happen again. However, this isn't going to stop other questioners from bringing it up, rehashing the situation, and then making connections with that. And the school board was investigated and, connecting her role in that with this combative attitude. But we're going to see all of that work out, just trying to give you some more context and background.
Can you give an example of a time when you've been on the minority end of a vote and that you still, because this is a board for the city, for the children, that you've still been able to promote whatever it was that was voted on?
As a support in schools, we use reading inventory and math inventory. Those are summative data that we get where students have a gap, and how do we fix that? But in doing that, getting that data, then we provide the students, and there's a program called Reading 180 and Math 180. There are times that I question, why are we teaching students by a computer and not with a teacher with direct instruction? So through the budget process, there's been times that those votes have come up. I did not vote in favor for that support, but then used the data and worked with staff in regards to, okay, if we're using it, how can we make it better?
Exactly correct. Kids do not learn on computers. We must vote for in-person direct instruction every single time. And also important to note, Jackie Pioli voted to reopen schools in winter of 2021 and get our kids back in the classroom where they belong. Next up, we're going to hear from Representative Megan Cottrell. As she explained, she is the one who nominated Jackie. And so the questions that she is asking are really to discredit the popular narrative about Jackie and establish what I would also consider a more true version of the story. Of course, that is for you to decide.
Everyone should know that I nominated you for this position. But I cannot predict the future, whoever is to win. I hope to work collaboratively with whoever that person is. So what is DEI?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion policy.
There was strong reactions. However, it is my understanding that this was passed in a bipartisan way. Is that correct? And how were you able to achieve that?
It was passed in with bipartisan ways on the board. That policy put on paper, what makes some people feel uncomfortable. It is totally to the left. to what some people feel. But again, I think we always have to stay student focused.
So I am no fan of this DEI policy, as I have said several times now. However, what it does demonstrate is that Jackie works collaboratively across party lines with all board members. And as I'm going to show in the next clip, what it says in that policy, in my opinion, is very disconnected from her vision of implementation and what that looks like in the classroom. Because while I don't agree with what's on paper in that DEI policy, in this next clip, I am almost in full agreement with her vision of what that looks like.
Those supports should already be in place. There is RTI, which was a response to intervention. There's scientific-based research intervention. And that's kind of what I did. I had honest conversations of, look, here's the state guide on what we need to provide. We're already doing that, so let's then come together and help support all students.
Representative Cottrell's final question, at least for this time being, is about the time that Jackie Pioli had resigned from the Board of Education and who had, quote, talked her off the ledge. Jackie's response is that this was in the midst of COVID lockdowns and she was feeling overworked, trying to write all sorts of new policies, and of course she had her own family. However, after sending her email with the letter of resignation, almost immediately, Superintendent Lucero reached out, asked her what was going on, and figured out how Jackie could continue her work on the Board of Education. So once again, this goes to show that there is more to the situation than is often perceived by the public.
Representative Grunberger, please carry forward.
Hi, Jackie. I just want to say that we spoke several months ago for a long time, and I was impressed that your depth of knowledge and your passion and your life force concerning the students. And then I heard a lot of negative things, and I was pleasantly surprised. I got 4 phone calls this week from parents who told me that you specifically went to bat for their kids, and they told me the specific stories, and it didn't sound like window dressing to me. It was real deep stuff. So I appreciate that.
Grunberger then goes on to ask a couple of questions, one about special education and how we can make it more accessible specifically to students of color. And the second question was about how do we measure the success of the Board of Education and any programs that we implement. I'm not going to play those questions or answers because I feel like we've mostly covered them already. We know that Jackie is an advocate for special education students by profession. We know that she has an extensive knowledge with how to work with that population of students and more broadly of our schools in general and what should be going on there and how we measure that success using data.
Representative Pioli.
I have one question. If confirmed, how do you envision your relationship with the fellow board members who know full well that you are not endorsed by the DCC?
We'll get back to the obviously partisan line of questioning in a moment. However, this is kind of how it's going to go from here. The same questions asked in a slightly different way. She's already answered this. She's talked about how she's worked collaboratively across the aisle. She's talked about how even when a vote didn't go her way, she did what she could to make sure that that policy was implemented, that data was collected and used in the most effective way to evaluate both our students and the work that the board was doing. And now let's talk about these party politics. It's one thing to say these decisions are political, and it's another to be entrenched in party politics. Politics is when you present policy, you work to create a coalition and get the votes you need to pass it. There's politics involved in that. However, framing it within the party politics is totally unnecessary and quite honestly, disgusting. If she is the one who is chosen to be put on the board, it is because she is the best for the job and her party affiliation should not matter. And if other school board members from the Democratic Party do find it to be an issue, or if other members of the Board of Representatives do find it to be an issue, I suggest they take a hard look in the mirror and ask themselves, are they there for the best interests of the people of Stamford? Or are they there for the best interests of a political party that does not give a damn about you or me or this town? And that's where I'll leave that, at least for now, because there is going to be some more of it.
The next one is Representative Walston, please.
How do you feel about student athletes? You know, like if they're like a borderline D and C, how do you feel about them still being eligible to be on a team?
You can produce a great athlete, but the fact is, if they're getting a 1.0, they're not going to a D1 school to play sports.
So a little bit more context here. While Jackie Pioli was on the school board, she worked to increase the standards for student athletes. In Stamford, I believe the minimum a student could have was a 2.0 to participate in athletics. And actually in the Fairfield County League, it was down to a 1.0, which is a D-. And Jackie's point is she raised this standard not to punish student athletes, but because by pushing them along and allowing such a low academic standard is actually doing them a disservice in the long run. They're not going to a D1 school, let alone any college with a D-, unless it's maybe the community college. And so she increased the standards and provided those supports that students needed throughout a probationary period. So they had that opportunity to get their grades up and see the same success in the classroom as they were seeing on the playing field. And I think that this is, again, all the more reason that we need Jackie Pioli, somebody who really does care about excellence, holding that high standard of education in our schools. Next up, we have Representative Sherwood. I'm not going to play the clip. She asked a question related to the budget. Last November, the Board of Education overwhelmingly approved an increase in salary for administrators. It was an 8-1 vote. However, when it got to the Board of Representatives, they voted it down. And so she asked Jackie Pioli, first of all, if she's familiar with it, and if so, what her vote would have been. Jackie says she's not familiar with the entirety of it. However, she does believe the crux of it is the large increase in the administrator salary, 10% over 3 years, and the comparatively much lower raise for teachers. And she said, therefore, she believes she would have voted no because the heart of schools is in the classroom with teachers and students. And so she could not justify giving the administrators such a raise and the teachers comparatively a much smaller raise.
The next questioner is Representative Bukes.
How you think the Board of Ed has in the past while you were on it, or in the meantime while you have not been on it, held the superintendent and central office team accountable, for some of the challenges, like, the increasing reading scores and increasing math scores and some of the other issues, making sure that the teachers are heard, stemming from a lot of the vote of no confidence that we've heard about in the media. What is the accountability level of the superintendent central office?
In 2018, when I ran on the board, my biggest thing was accountability, transparency, and equality, right? I can't answer that because I haven't seen it happen.
So Bukes follows up by asking, how will she ensure that there's transparency and accountability if she gets appointed to the school board? And Jackie responds by saying she will utilize the goals and review structures that are already in place, with the suggestion being that they're not being used. And rightly so. Bukes continues to push her on this issue. So let's check out that interaction.
And from your experience, is that used when reviewing the teachers and looking at their results and when reviewing the other staff members? Does that actually happen where tough questions are asked and answered and goals are looked at throughout the period? Or is it sort of like, okay, well, you're only part of all this huge behemoth of education system that we have, and let's all throw our hands up in the air? I feel like there are a lot of constituents that feel like, the system is so large and no one takes accountability for anything. I don't see a clear path, to success without really being able to your knowledge, like, is that happening within the reviews, within, the meetings when you're evaluating contracts, or is it not really?
So due to executive session rules, and I know you're familiar with those, I can't specifically go into conversations that are happening during reviews. I can't discuss that. So I apologize, but I can't ethically have that conversation with you. And I'm currently not on the board to say what has happened.
I am very frustrated with Jackie on this answer. It is just a total cop out. Yes, there are closed executive sessions where you can't divulge specific details. However, she could have given a general answer of yes or no in a specific direction without getting anywhere near that ethical boundary. So it's extremely frustrating that she couldn't answer this question. I don't know why she couldn't just say, no, these meetings did not hold these teachers accountable, and I was one of the only ones asking hard questions. And in fact, for the administration, their reviews are public information. Once they've been documented and created, they publish those for the public to see. So I really don't understand what the problem is here. Bukes does press her a little bit further on it, but then she's basically just like, I can't, let's move on.
Representative Figueroa.
Next up is Representative Figueroa. She starts off by saying she has received several phone calls in support of Jackie Pioli, and then follows up with a couple of questions pertaining to the Hispanic student population in the Stamford Public Schools. They are the largest category of students in our schools, and she wants to make sure that they are getting the resources and support they need. Of course, we know that Jackie wrote the DEI policy. She is particularly focused on these populations of students, and this support predates COVID. So I'm not going to play the answer to this one. Let's go to the next one, which gets interesting.
The next question is from Representative Shaw.
I'm going to ask this question because I have gotten many of my constituents and parents that I work with in schools that have brought this up. I'm not going into too much details because I know we all know the history, but there was an investigation that was conducted in 2021, and there was a report issued by Dave Pitney, right? Come forward and emailed me and asked, well, this was due to the whatever conduct, and this has costed the city almost $400,000 in legal fees, which is taxpayers' money. So what are your thoughts, and what would you have done differently, or what would you do differently to avoid that situation?
So if you've been living under a rock here in Stamford, or maybe you're from out of town and you're just following along for this, Representative Shaw is referring to the investigation into the school board that began about mid-2019 and went through the 2021 school year. What she is leaving out of the framing of her question is that investigation was prompted by the superintendent. The superintendent accused the school board of being so dysfunctional that she couldn't do her job. She accused members of the school board of bullying and coercing her and making her job untenable. Maybe there was dysfunction on the school board. Maybe it really was causing her stress. However, I also want you to consider that perhaps there was other reasons for the investigation that had less to do with actual workings of it and more to do with politics. Now, I'll leave that up to you to decide. You can go back, read the advocate's coverage, read the report itself that was produced. I am going to play a little clip of Jackie's answer. If you go back and watch the whole tape, you'll see that she says that this was an investigation only into 6 members of the school board, not just her, and that there's 9 members altogether, but that's actually inaccurate. The investigation was into the entire school board. Only about half of the members consented to being interviewed, and the other half did not. So just know that this was an investigation into the entire school board, not particular members. And again, go back, read the coverage, read the report for yourself.
What I will stress is I was 1 out of 9 members. So when I hear that I specifically, Jackie Pioli, caused the city of Stamford or cost them $400,000, well, that's not the truth.
I just want to make sure that it was not just you, but then if you go back on the board, you will need to be able to work with all these people. So granted that, how would you get to that point to be able to work with everybody?
So here we are once again back at the question, Can Jackie Pioli work with other members of the board? I think she's very clearly and thoroughly explained how she can, so I'm not going to play the answer to this. Shaw does go on to ask a couple of questions that are related to the budget. Jackie really flexes her knowledge on the process and explains why she voted the way she did, which in Shaw's framing is unpopular, which makes sense because Shaw is the one vote for Janine Burke. So we can really see that she's trying to get her here. This is some more of these party politic games, in my opinion, although Shaw does a much better job of veiling them without the obvious party politics that we're going to see next questioner.
Representative Jacobson, thank you. Please go ahead.
I first want to ask you about this endorsement by the SEA. Ben Lee's resignation became effective. My understanding was that the next step was going to be a DCC process, but I saw that you were endorsed by the SEA. What can you tell me about that?
So this right here, this is what we're up against. Mr. Jacobson is not on the appointments committee, so he did not vote. But when it goes on February 6th to the entire Board of Representatives, this type of party politics nonsense is what we're up against. His question asks why she got her nomination from the teachers union and didn't use the good old boys Democratic committee process. I mean, how could you ever think to do such a thing? And I didn't play this in the clip, but he prefaces his question by saying, I really respect you for not bringing party politics to the school board. And then he immediately pivots and says, but this is political. And in doing so, he conflates the definition of something being political, meaning you have to negotiate and compromise and try to convince people to vote your way. That's political. Party politics is doing it the party's way, following the party's process, pulling the party's line. And the party's line and what the party wants do not align with what the people of Stamford, Connecticut want. And it doesn't matter if it's the Democratic or Republican Party. In this case, we happen to be talking about the Democrat Party. If you look at the Board of Representatives, it is dominated by Democrats. So they happen to be the point of attack in this. But if it were the Republicans, I'd be saying the same exact thing. So I'm going to play a little clip of Jackie's answer. I don't love how she handles this, but let's watch it and talk about it.
I first heard it in June. So it wasn't Ben stepped down and then it has been an ongoing conversation. So I took the initiative myself. I made those phone calls. I did that on my own with no backing, but that was where I went for. And that was because of the difficulties. And I mean, you said you read the paper, you read about you read about what was happened at the DCC and the comments that were made. You read those in the paper. That's why I reached out to the teachers union.
What Jackie is referring to here is that after she had already served a term as a school board member, she was seeking re-election and she did try to go through the DCC. However, in that process, other candidates were chosen to fill the Democrat Party line on the ballot. And so she went independent. And so to avoid that this time around, she chose to get the nomination from the teachers union instead of the Democrat Party. This obviously doesn't make Jacobson happy. He goes on to question her about her changing party affiliation. And Jackie, she takes us through the whole history and why she did this and why she did that, when really all she should have said is that I'm a free thinker. I'm here for the people and not for any particular political party. I'm going to use the political mechanism to get to the position that is best suited at the time. She should have shut these party politics down right away. It kind of goes on and on. Ultimately, Jacobson pushes the party politics to the side and says, well, really, the thing is that how can I go back to my constituents and tell them I appointed you when the last election you ran in, they overwhelmingly voted for the other person? And Jackie, in response, kind of alludes again to this party politics without being too specific. I think it's not a great answer. I also think Jacobson is being misleading in the framing of the question. Yeah, they voted for the person who went on to win, but what about the other votes after that? Did Jackie come in second? Did she come in third? who were the other players? So while it's certainly a fair question, ultimately you are responsible as a representative to your constituents, I don't think he's giving all of the information. For his last question, Jacobson asks about the way Jackie voted on the budgets.
You didn't vote on 2 of the 3 budgets. Is that accurate? Either you I think you abstained on one and weren't present at another meeting. Am I mistaken?
Jackie explains the abstention is because she had just gotten on the school board and didn't feel comfortable making such a big decision without feeling like she had all of the information and fully understood the process. For the second budget vote, she was absent because she had a death in the family. However, she does explain that she took part in all of the negotiations that led up to that vote. So that's it for Jacobson. Let's get on to our next questioner.
Said before, your passion gets the best of you. And I sometimes worry about that. I worry about whether your passion will prevent you from being more effective. The concern that Representative Shaw raised before was the fact that during the time that you were on the board, there was an investigation prompted by the school superintendent and on the behalf of herself and members of her senior leadership team, who said that certain members, not all 9 members now, certain members of the board may be creating a hostile and toxic work environment for the administration. They talked about suffering emotional distress. They were being intimidated. They were being bullied. They were being publicly criticized inappropriately using false and unfounded information. There was retaliatory actions. It was interfering with the day-to-day operations of the school.
So here we are once again rehashing the investigation into the school board, which Representative Shaw already brought up and Jackie Pioli went over in detail. So I'll put it out there again for you to decide. Is this really about the dysfunction of the school board and members of the school board bullying the administration? Or is this about the superintendent not putting on her big girl pants and getting her job done? So go back, read the report, and decide for yourself. After this, Representative Cottrell makes a second appearance, really trying to push back on this narrative of Jackie being a bad person, an inflammatory, combative person who can't get along on the school board, and instead offering the narrative that the investigation and all of the shenanigans was caused by party politics. Specifically, she is suggesting the influence of party politics and how that may have directed the investigation far more than any misconduct from the school board members. So again, we are seeing how much party politics plays a role on our local level. And the next questioner just reinforces that. Let's listen to him.
I'm being asked to go against my party to support you. So I want to give you an opportunity to explain to me why I should vote against the DCC and take the risk on another term of you at the Board of Education and how it won't be chaotic.
Representative Goldberg, we've been dancing around this many times tonight. I will take your last comments as a comment.
Thankfully, Chairman Patterson says we've already been over this. We're just going to take this as a comment. I do, however, want to talk about the party politics angle of this one more time. He says very clearly he cares more about the line of the Democratic Party than what's doing best for the people of Stamford. Just take that in for a moment. Now, consider the fact that Janine Burke, who we're going to see in a moment, was also on the school board at the time of this investigation. In fact, she was the president. And so really what Goldberg is trying to do here is say, oh, Janine Burke, she was innocent. She was one of the school board members who wasn't investigated, and you were. Again, this is repeating the lie that Representative Mays was trying to suggest earlier, which is that it was particular members of the school board that were being investigated, but really it was the entire school board, although the administration was pointing their fingers at particular members of the school board. And so here we are, over 3 hours into the meeting. Now it is time for the board to interview Janine Burke. She's also a former school board member, and she is the DCC endorsed candidate. I'm going to skip right to the second questioner. The first questioner is Representative Walston, and she asks about Janine's contributions to ensuring that students of color succeed in our schools and how she supported students throughout the pandemic and afterwards. Janine flexes her resume, which by any objective standard is respectable. She is a super volunteer. She loves this community, and I don't think that anybody can doubt that. She also mentions that one of the accomplishments she's most proud of is her leadership of the board throughout the pandemic and what they got done. But let's go ahead and get into the second questioner, Representative Figueroa.
Can you please walk me through your understanding of the difference between equality and equity?
As I've made clear, I'm no fan of the DEI policy, and the E is for equity, so I'm no fan of equity. But seeing Janine fumble this answer after the focus of the school board being, for the last 2.5 years, all about equity is priceless.
For example, if I am an employer and I have employees that I'm interviewing for a position, and I automatically or have on the back end already decided who I want to hire, there's a bias built in there. How do we remove that bias? That both candidates can equally apply for that role, but the equality comes in when that hiring manager takes the bias away because they haven't already predetermined who they want to hire.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you saying the equity.
Equity?
Yes.
Equity and equality, oftentimes people use those interchangeably. So I'm not sure that there's a real striking distinction.
Well, I'm glad to know that you don't think there's a difference between equity and equality. I mean, we might more or less agree on that point. But literally for the last 2+ years, all the school board has talked about is this DEI policy. How do we create more equity? But maybe if Janine was sleeping less during the school board meeting, which we're going to see Figueroa ask about next, and I will provide proof for that. But what's interesting is actually in her example she gives about like removing barriers and making sure that we take out the bias from the system, that is equity. But she just doesn't know enough to call it by the right term. She calls it equally and equal, which are the same word in different forms. Not too bright of a moment here for Burke, to say the least.
Some phone calls expressing their concerns when you were a member of the Board of Education. During some presentations, you fell to sleep during those presentations. So I just want to make sure, that should you be given that opportunity, and I could respect your smile, and will you be able to stay awake during those meetings?
I spoke to Representative Figueroa about an hour before the meeting, and part of our conversations were about my concerns about Janine's ability to stay awake. I have seen on more than one occasion her dozing off during meetings. I've gotten texts on many occasions asking if I was watching the school board meeting and if I also thought that Janine was sleeping. I've heard from other school board members that it was a recurring joke in their circles about what time Janine would start dozing off in the meeting. Of course, Janine denies this, but the proof is on video. Next up, we have Representative Cottrell. Of course, we know that she nominated Jackie Pioli, so her line of questioning is going to be trying to build the narrative that Janine is part of the DCC establishment who cares more about party politics than actually getting things done on the school board. In her first question, she asked Janine about her greatest accomplishments. Janine talks about being president during the pandemic and how that was a tough time for everybody, but she feels that she did a good job. And then Cottrell asks, what would you do differently to make things run better next time you're on the board? And this is Janine's answer.
I really want time limits on some of the meetings and the committee meetings at the board level. So, trying to help the board understand more about efficiencies. I see the way this board operates. I'm on a number of boards and committees and governance where I work at Stamford Hospital, and we would not be able to get things done if we operated the way our Board of Education works.
So there you have it. Janine wants things to run more efficiently. She wants to stifle the discussions and make sure that she gets to bed on time. Now that might be a little bit of an oversimplification. Cottrell definitely takes her to task on this point, saying what's the balance between efficiency and making sure things are fully discussed, points out that it's quite late at night and their board is making sure that they are asking all those hard, tough questions and getting thorough answers. Representative Cottrell goes on to ask about the relationship between the administration and the school board and what an ideal relationship should look like and how to work collaboratively with the other members in the administration and what's the appropriate level of criticism and how you can both hold people accountable and also work together. And this is kind of just Janine's general philosophy on it. She's teeing her up for the more specific questions about the BOE investigation while she was president. However, Chairman Patterson cuts her off and says, hey, I'm going to circle back to you. Let me get some other questioners in here. So let's get to that next questioner, and then we'll come back to Cottrell later.
So you were on for 7 years, and you decided not to run again last election?
I did.
And you changed your mind recently?
Janine explains that at the time she would have had to declare her candidacy, she had a family member who was ill, and she felt that her time and energy had to go towards that. The situation has resolved, and now that the seat is open, she is ready to serve again. Pavia then goes on to ask some kind of general questions, similar ones that he asked to Pioli about what attributes she brings to the board, why she wants this job again. And again, Janine just went over her record as president and during the pandemic, her leadership and how much she loves this community and has given back to it.
I have a yes or no question up front. Okay, and here it is. Would you hire a teacher who, during the course of an interview, struggles with the basic distinction of equity and equality? Yes or no?
I don't think that's a yes or no.
Of course you don't think it's a yes or no answer because you fumbled through the difference between equity and equality. And that's what she continues to do here, just kind of stumbles through an answer. Next up is Representative Sherwood, and as she asked Jackie Pioli about the most recent budget that was passed by the Board of Education in November 22, but then was rejected by the Board of Representatives, she asked Janine a similar question. And in this case, Janine was actually on the board, and she voted for that budget, which gave administrators an outsized raise. And so she asked her why she made that vote.
We don't want to lose administrators because we are not looking at the correct market value of our employees. So it's important to send that message. And I think that's what I was supporting.
Education administration was asked if we have an issue with retention in these administrator positions, and we don't. Generally speaking, in the area, we pay more for our administrators currently without that raise than almost all of the surrounding districts. And
I didn't know that information at the time.
Once again, Janine is revealing she doesn't really have the information she needs to make the votes, and she doesn't even know that she needs to have that information. She says we need to retain our administration as if administration retention and not teacher retention is the problem. She says that we need to make sure that we're compensating them correctly, as if they're not some of the most highly compensated administrators in the whole state. Next up is Representative Bukes. He is the lone Republican on the Appointments Committee and one of the few Republicans on the Board of Representatives. And he brings back this party politics angle and asks Janine this question.
Looking over your application that we received, and the question towards the end, or why are you interested in this role? Your last sentence was, my primary interest in returning to the BOE is to use my voice, ability to engage others, and to work collaboratively with Democrats to move these initiatives forward.
Janine pushes back and questions if that was the Board of Representatives application or if that was the application from the DCC. Representative Cottrell confirms, actually, we just forwarded the application that was directly from the DCC. So perhaps there is something to this idea of, well, it was the audience. I was talking to the DCC, this group of Democrats. Nonetheless, I think it still reveals this party politics that is going on unnecessarily. The DCC, yes, they're Democrats. However, this is about what is best for the people of Stamford and not the Democratic Party. And so it shouldn't just be about working collaboratively with Democrats. They shouldn't hold that up as an ideal. It should just be working collaboratively with other members of the board, regardless of their party affiliation. And now Jeanine will go on to clarify and say that she will work with both sides of the aisle. They go back and forth on that for a while, and then Bukes asks a question about the relationship between the school board and the administration and her relationship with the administration and how she can navigate that. Again, I feel like she's kind of addressed this in various ways. She doesn't really give any specifics, and it's just kind of a general blah answer, in my opinion.
The next question is Representative Matheny.
The elephant in the room is the investigation that took place. So were you the president at the time when that happened?
I was.
And this representative actually prefaced this question by asking Jeanine if she was president at any point on the school board and what the responsibilities of the president are. And so she's really teeing her up to say, hey, you played a role in this investigation too. You're not just an innocent bystander. What could you have done as a leader before the situation got so out of hand that the administration had an investigation done on it?
I'm trying to think of there was a number of steps we took before we got to that point. Why they did not succeed. I can't speak for everyone, but I will say in general, it is every board member's responsibility to abide by the bylaws, to know the bylaws, to abide by the bylaws. And if they have questions, to come forward so that they can get them answered if they are not clear on what a bylaw is for, or the limitations of it. And
so, but as the president, and you had seen that people weren't abiding by those bylaws, were there times where you specifically intervened with certain members of the board that were potentially were considered having issues or couldn't work together?
I said it. Other board members said it. There was a consensus that we needed to address behaviors. We needed to address our conduct in board meetings, and that's as a result of that. Those facilitations, those review of bylaws, those opinions from attorneys, all of that took place. So it really boils down to each individual taking responsibility, so that it doesn't become a larger issue for the group.
So I let that one play out for a while because I think it is a very important dynamic to highlight. Sure, Jeanine did initiate steps in terms of reviewing the bylaws and holding certain group interventions. However, at the end of the day, she takes no personal responsibility for her leadership of really how she influenced that process. She says it's really just down to each individual board member, and I have no ability to influence the way they behave or the direction that this board goes in. So now we're back to Representative Cottrell for her second round of questioning of Jeanine Burke. If you recall, she was really building up to dig into the party politics and the role it played in the Board of Education and shaping this public perception of Jackie Pioli as being combative and a problem. And rather, she's really trying to tell the story that Jeanine Burke is part of the problem, that Jeanine Burke is part of these establishment party politics that aren't truly representative of the situation and are misleading the people of Stamford. She is very long-winded and does more storytelling than question asking, so I'm just going to play a couple of short clips.
There has been this effort to create this public perception that once Jackie Pioli was off the board and Nick Tarzia, the two that got into a fight, that it was over. The hostility was over, okay? In April of 2022, I invited the current president of the board, Ms. Huffman, to the education committee meeting. She said to us in April of 2022 that basically the relationship of board members had drastically improved since the 2021 election. It was less than 3 months later, our current board president lobbed a lot of accusations at Mr. Lee. She accused board members of having a secret meeting with zero. A perception was created that was false about who he is. And I am concerned that there is an effort on the Board of Education to continually, when people do not thump their chests and follow the Democratic line all the time, that they will be accused of being hostile. And I'm very concerned about it. How do we fix this?
Okay. I don't know.
That's not, you didn't launch that bomb.
I'm trying to figure out where do I fit into this in terms of my wanting to come back to the board. And I think,
right. Okay. You didn't launch that grenade. That is not Miss Burke's grenade, but I'm afraid that the grenade thrower uses that to say to people, fall in line or else. And that is my concern about the overall culture of the Board of Education.
Okay. I mean, I can't say that I cannot, in all honesty, cannot say that that's the culture of the board.
Of course, Janine plays dumb and says, I have no notion of any idea of what you're talking about or what I, Janine Burke, have to do with establishment party politics. And I think that denial of having any idea not only goes to show that Janine just really doesn't seem to have much of a concrete grasp of anything that's going on, despite her admirable contributions to the community and her mentoring and her volunteering. When it comes down to the policy and the actual work of the board and the politics that go into it, she seems utterly clueless. And then finally, it's not a question, but we get a comment from Representative Shaw. And now keep in mind, we have the benefit of hindsight, so we know that she is the one vote for Janine Burke. And instead of asking a question like the series of tough questions that she asked Jackie Pioli, she simply makes some flattering comments about all the hard work and dedication Janine has given to the city with her time on the school board, as well as a mentor. And I think it's really interesting that she doesn't even attempt to create any sort of narrative by putting Janine on the spot and questioning her about her role in the investigation or anything like that. She's just trying to deflect, because as we've seen, Janine doesn't really have any good answers for those questions. All right, we are there. The board goes on to take the vote, and like we know, it is 8-1. And yes, while the appointments committee overwhelmingly went against the Democratic Party endorsed candidate, as we've gotten a preview tonight, she is up against a much tougher crowd on February 6th. Representatives who are far more interested in party politics than just good old local politics. And so this is my call to action to you. Make your voice heard. Send an email both to the general board email as well as individually to each representative, and then look up who your representative is for your district and reach out to them. And when you talk to them, tell them why you support Jackie, why you are not supporting Janine, and also include something about your distaste for the party politics that has been injected into this decision and more generally into the politics of Stamford. Remind them that there is a difference between politics and party politics, and that you'll be tuning in on February 6th for this very important decision. Now, to make it easy, I'm going to put all of that in a post over at Stamford Parents United. So for those of you who are already on the mailing list, I sent out an email that has a template and script for you to use. For those of you who are not yet on the mailing list, head over to StamfordParentsUnited.com. First of all, join the mailing list and then go over to the updates and you will see the post that includes all the information, including the template, the script, and the emails where you should be sending it. Our politics have become so nationalized, but this is where you can truly make a difference. This is where your representatives truly listen to you and they are responsive to you. You can really make a difference here. So please take those actions. I'm asking for you to support Jackie Pioli. However, at the end of the day, you've assessed the situation and you are the best person to make that decision. If you like this video, definitely hit that thumbs up button. Subscribe to this channel because we are going to be doing these updates more often. If you have any questions or if there's anything in particular you want to see, leave a comment or send an email to StamfordParentsUnited@gmail.com. Thank you for watching. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and let's get to work.